Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Emily Parker lived in a beautiful house overlooking the ocean with her husband, Daniel, a charming and influential man. To the outside world, their marriage seemed perfect. But behind the smiles and elegant dinners, a betrayal was brewing. For several months, Daniel had been having an affair with Sarah Bennett, his attractive and ambitious colleague. That evening, Emily, driven by an intuition that had been gnawing at her for weeks, decided to surprise them. She found them near the cliff, their voices low but trembling with complicity. She heard Daniel whisper, "No one will ever know." And a chill of betrayal ran through her. Her heart broke, but she showed nothing. As she was about to leave, Daniel and Sarah saw her. Daniel's eyes, usually so gentle, were cold and calculating. Sarah gave a cruel smile. Before Emily could react, they shoved her. The wind howled around her, and she felt the void beneath her feet. The rocks below seemed to pull her into oblivion. She fell unconscious, her body hitting the rocks and the raging sea. Daniel and Sarah remained at the edge of the cliff, breathing heavily, convinced their crime would go unpunished. Emily Parker, the woman they thought they had erased from this world, was disappearing, but somewhere, in the shadow of the waves and the pain, her survival was beginning to take shape. The roar of the sea tore at her ears. Emily felt her limbs break against the rocks. She couldn't breathe, each breath was a struggle. Everything around her seemed to fade away, the cliff, the night, Daniel's face. She thought it was the end, but her survival instinct took over. When she regained consciousness, it was in a tiny shack, dimly lit by an oil lamp. A weathered man, John Miller, a solitary fisherman, watched her anxiously. He murmured, "You'll get through this, calm down." Emily tried to speak, but her throat was dry and painful. Every movement tore a stifled cry from her. John tended her wounds with precise and patient movements. For days, she remained in a semi-coma, her body ravaged but her mind lucid. She dreamed of Daniel and Sarah, of their cruel smiles, and a fire burned in her heart. She had to survive to have her revenge. The following weeks were a nightmare of pain and loneliness. But with John's help, she slowly regained her strength. She learned to walk again, each step on the cabin floor reminding her of life's fragility and the need for patience. She spent hours gazing at the ocean, imagining the vengeance that would come, like the waves relentlessly crashing against the rocks. While Emily recovered, John became an unexpected mentor. He taught her fishing, survival skills, but also patience and strategy. Determined, Emily listened attentively to every word. Little by little, she understood that she didn't just want to punish Daniel and Sarah, she wanted to destroy them, intelligently, without ever putting herself in danger. As the months passed, Emily transformed. Her anger became cold and calculating. Every scar on her body was a reminder of her mission. And deep down, a thought took hold: the day would come when she would walk into Daniel and Sarah's world again, not as the victim, but as the woman who would bring them down. The first few years after the fall were a slow forgery of the soul. Emily spent months rebuilding what the sea and the betrayal had shattered, not just her body, but her confidence, her self-image, and the place she believed she held in the world. Every morning, she awoke with a dull ache that reminded her of the night on the cliff. But instead of breaking her, the ache sharpened her resolve. John Miller, the fisherman who had rescued her, was not just a caregiver, he became her life coach. He taught her about engine mechanics, how to read currents, and the art of patience. "The world doesn't forgive impatience," he would tell her repeatedly as he mended a net. They would talk for long periods at the rickety table in the shack. John knew the sea, knew men, and above all, he knew the cruelty and cunning necessary to survive in troubled waters. One winter evening, as a fire crackled, John placed a rough hand on Emily's shoulder. "Do you want to go back there?" he asked gently. She closed her eyes. Her heart sank, and the answer she whispered was a promise: yes. But not like before. Slowly, Emily began to reinvent herself. The hair she once wore flowing in curls was cut short with a sharp gesture, then frequently dyed and styled differently. She learned to conceal the signs of her recovery, to modulate her voice, firmer, more composed, and to control the emotion that once shone through her face. Each garment she chose contributed to a new image, colder, more confident. She was erasing, piece by piece, the woman Daniel thought he knew. John wasn't just her moral support, he revealed practical skills to her. He introduced her to managing a small bank account, the basics of fishing accounting, and above all, how to read people. "Look at their hands," he would say. "They betray the soul faster than the mouth." Emily observed, memorized the tics, the lies, the silences. She practiced fake smiles, neutral answers, the art of waiting. But the most deliberate transformation was internal. Where Emily's anger had once been a fierce, savage flame, it became a cold blade. She read books on economics, psychology, and rhetoric, borrowed from the village library and sometimes brought in by passing ships. She secretly took distance courses, repaying each lesson with hours of work on the coast. Her nights were spent studying businesses, understanding how power is structured and how it is cleverly dismantled. 5 years, she thought one evening as she gazed at the stars, that was how long it would take. 5 years to become invisible, then untouchable. 5 years to learn to walk in shoes that wouldn't betray her. John respected this silent timeline. He helped her erase Emily Parker's traces, open a new account under a different name, and buy a small house in town under a legitimate identity, Isabella Gray, resolute and polite, who could account for past investments and a discreet inheritance. The city absorbed her like a promise. Isabella Gray wasn't just a facade, she was a methodical construct. Emily signed up for charity events, appeared at Chamber of Commerce parties, and made donations that garnered recognition, not superfluous attention. She invested in modest but well-positioned ventures, a local tech startup, a logistics consultancy. Each investment was a piece of the puzzle, a small hand extended to guide and control the financial networks Daniel frequented. When she first returned to the road leading to the house where she had once lived, her heart pounded, but there was no panic or fury. She observed the facade, the neglected roses, the windows that seemed smaller than before. Her gaze didn't seek immediate revenge, it studied. Who came here? Who knocked at the door? Who laughed in the hall? She made mental notes, simple and methodical. Isabella Gray's eye recorded the schedules, the routines, the drivers, the suppliers, everything that made up Daniel's microcosm. During those years, Emily also cultivated a cool distance. She accepted superficial meetings with businessmen, rewarded lawyers with a calculated smile, and allowed controlled rumors to circulate. She learned to use the media to her advantage, an article here, an interview there, never about her private life, but enough visibility to make her a respected and elusive figure. Social media would later provide her with a playing field, for now, she was preparing her pieces and choosing her pawns. One afternoon, at her favorite cafe, a young woman asked the question that would confirm the plan was taking shape. "Miss Gray, how do you manage to stay so calm?" asked the barista, her curiosity almost disarming. Isabella smiled, revealing nothing. "Patience is a strategy," she said simply. "And preparation is the discipline." As night fell, when the city lights faded and the lights became scarce, Emily allowed herself a moment of solitude. She took out an old photograph she kept hidden, a crumpled snapshot of a dinner with Daniel, a memento of a bygone life, and looked at it without nostalgia. There was no hatred consuming her vision, there was a cold determination. Wounds had been transformed into plans, fears into tools. She wasn't seeking destruction for the sake of revenge, she wanted to expose, diminish, and make those who had driven her to despair pay. The transformation wasn't perfect. Sometimes a reflection in a shop window was enough to make her waver for a moment, but those moments were shorter. Emily now knew that the true weapon wasn't shouting, but patience. She had learned to listen to silences, to interpret glances, to weave invisible networks around those who had betrayed her. Soon, she thought, switching off the light, Daniel and Sarah would be part of a chessboard she would completely control. And when the time came, the sea that had almost swallowed her would serve as a silent witness. She, the the survivor, would stand tall, no longer in the shadow of a victim, but in the light of a woman who knew what she had to do. The silent countdown continued. 5 years. Patience. Planning. Revenge. 5 years had passed since that fateful night. Emily, now Isabella Gray, walked the familiar streets with a confident stride, her face meticulously altered and her gaze filled with cold determination. The city seemed unchanged, but she saw everything differently. Every shop, every street corner, every face reminded her of fragments of her past, and opportunities for revenge. Isabella Gray quickly became an influential figure thanks to her strategic investments and calculated public appearances. She wasn't seeking power for its own sake, she wanted it for Daniel and Sarah. And soon, fate intervened. Daniel's thriving but vulnerable company was seeking new investors and partners to expand. Isabella attended the annual meeting as a representative of a discreet investment fund, and it was there that she saw Daniel for the first time since the collapse. He didn't recognize her immediately. His features had changed, his posture was different, his presence new. Yet, his eyes betrayed an instinctive curiosity, almost a premonition. She observed Sarah from a distance. The former mistress now wore an elegant suit, exuding a conquering air, but she seemed nervous, as if the survivor's intuition hovered around her. Isabella noted every detail, gestures, glances, expressions, everything would be useful. During their first direct interaction, Daniel stepped forward with that confident smile he used to mask his ambitions. Isabella Gray? Pleased to meet you. Your reputation precedes you. Isabella smiled, polite but distant. Thank you, Mr. Parker. I have followed your growth with interest. The tone was light, but every word was chosen to mask her true identity while assessing her targets. She spoke of figures, projects, past investments, enough to impress, without revealing that she knew their most intimate secrets. Over the following weeks, Isabella gradually infiltrated their world. She became a member of several advisory boards, attended conferences where Daniel and Sarah were present, and cultivated relationships with their key collaborators. Her movements were precise, each gesture calculated to understand the dynamics of the company and the weaknesses of Daniel and Sarah. Tensions rose when she received an anonymous call from a supplier. You know, Daniel and Sarah are making big deals behind your back. Isabella smiled inwardly. Every thread of betrayal she uncovered served her plan. She noted the shady contracts, the hidden debts, the internal rivalries, everything that made her enemies vulnerable. But the closer Isabella got, the more she felt the complexity of her own revenge. Daniel, despite his years of betrayal, still seemed charismatic, seductive in his business dealings. Sarah remained audacious, manipulative, but also vulnerable when she thought she was in control. Isabella had to remain patient, conceal her emotions, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. One winter evening, Daniel invited Isabella to a private business dinner. The physical proximity stirred painful memories, the dinner where everything had changed, the lies exchanged on the cliff. But Isabella didn't flinch. She was now in control of her emotions, armed with the precision of a strategist. This dinner provided an opportunity to gather crucial information, alliances, enmities, and above all, the dynamic between Daniel and Sarah. At the end of the meal, as they were leaving the restaurant, Isabella thought, everything is ready. The game can begin. They don't yet know that I am the element they never saw coming, and that their downfall will be complete. 5 years of patience, learning, and transformation were now culminating in this moment. The survivor was no longer Emily Parker. She was Isabella Gray, and Daniel and Sarah would soon discover that some ghosts never die. The following weeks were a silent ballet of manipulation. Isabella Gray knew exactly where and how to strike. She began with subtle blows, poorly managed contracts, reoriented strategic alliances, anonymous revelations of past frauds. Every small mistake by Daniel and Sarah became a weakness that she patiently exploited. One morning, Daniel discovered that one of his key investments had been redirected without his knowledge. His employees murmured, his partners backed away. Sarah, panicked, tried to understand what was happening, but Isabella was always there, calm and professional, her face impassive. Their eyes sometimes met hers, but neither suspected that Isabella Gray was Emily Parker, the woman they had thought lost forever. Isabella played them like a chess master. She organized a gala event for the company, inviting investors and the media. Daniel and Sarah thought they could manipulate her into securing partnerships. But Isabella turned the evening into a public trap. She circulated documents exposing Daniel's past misdeeds and Sarah's shady deals. The journalists present took photos and noted the details, soon revealing the truth to the world. Daniel's face fell when the first questions were asked publicly. Sarah tried to comfort him, but his nervousness was palpable. They were used to manipulating others, never to being trapped themselves. Isabella, on the other hand, remained impassive, a cold smile on her lips, relishing the power of her position. The climax came a few days later, during a private confrontation. Isabella invited Daniel and Sarah to her office, under the pretext of a major agreement. When the door closed behind them, she dropped her professional facade. "You never knew me," she said softly, but with an icy intensity. Daniel instinctively recoiled, recognizing the familiar features in her eyes. Sarah paled, suddenly realizing the truth. "Emily," Daniel murmured, unable to finish. "Yes," she replied, her voice calm but sharp. "The woman you thought was dead, has returned." She showed them the evidence she had amassed over 5 years, the falsified contracts, the misappropriated accounts, the recordings of their schemes. Fear and despair were etched on their faces. Isabella didn't strike them physically, but every word, every document, every truth revealed shattered them inside. Their empire crumbled before their eyes, and they understood that they were now at her mercy. Emily/Isabella left the office, leaving Daniel and Sarah humbled and devastated. Revenge hadn't been swift, but it had been complete. She had exposed their betrayal, humiliated their arrogance, and reclaimed control of her life. A few days later, on the cliff where it had all begun, Emily stood facing the sea. The wind ruffled her hair, and she felt peace wash over her. She no longer needed revenge. She had survived, she had triumphed, and above all, she had regained her freedom. The past could no longer hurt her, she had become the master of her own destiny, stronger and more resilient than ever.